Welcome to the Lead Quick video, where we analyze trending issues and try to make them simple so that you can relate to them and be able to make sense out of them and position yourself, in making better judgment, better decisions in the society and amongst your friends and acquaintances. Now, we want to bring to your attention something very, very germane for many of us that uses the services of Bolt or Uber drivers. So we're going to be talking about Bolt and Uber drivers and Bolt and Uber management in this video, to look at how does the recent challenges in that ecosystem affect you and I as an individual, and even the Bolt drivers and Uber drivers who are our brothers and sisters, as the case may be. So before we continue, I want to invite or share this video to any Bolt or Uber driver so that they can also understand some of the intricacies in the issues that pertains to their work. And so we'd like you also to make a comment as to what this video intends to achieve and what your thinkings are, what your positions are on some of the issues that we're going to be raising on this video. Now, Bolt and Uber drivers have been facing several challenges in different countries, which have led to many of them coming out to protest and challenging the management of Bolt and Uber to court, taking them to court to challenge some of their decisions and some of the issues that they face in the course of their providing that very important services of moving goods and persons from one location to the other. Now, some of the main challenges that have continued to rear its head between the Bolt drivers and Uber drivers and the management include low pay, lack of benefits, long working hours, job insecurity, and salary concerns. Now, these are some of the issues, the pertinent issues that has come to the fore as these two heavyweights, like they say, when two lions fight, it is the grass that suffers. Now, what is happening in Nigeria, with regards to the e-hailing drivers, which are largely, these drivers that we're talking about, the Bolt and the Uber drivers, because recently they have threatened a million-man march, a million-man protest, against the management of Bolt and Uber drivers. So what does it mean? Now, early this year, the Nigerian government recognized the Amalgamated Union of App-Based Transport Workers of Nigeria, which is ALTA1 or OUT1, the union for all Bolt and Uber-like drivers, as a legal trade union of e-hailing platforms for Bolt and Uber drivers, making this union the first e-hailing union in Africa. And so we want to say kudos to Bolt and Uber drivers that have achieved this milestone, because we know from experience and from dealing with a lot of people, a lot of interest groups, that many workers find it difficult to put themselves together to form a union until when the matter gets very, very ugly. We had a case like that we treated in the pension industry, and that is why we are bringing this video to you. And so that is why we also have to commend the Bolt and Uber drivers for forming this union. Unfortunately, the leadership of this union is claiming that Bolt and Uber, they are very, very big companies with a lot of resources, that Bolt and Uber are lobbying the government of Nigeria to withdraw their certificates and their license recognition as a union. Now, what we are hearing is that Uber and Bolt management is insisting and refuting this allegation that they are not lobbying the government to withdraw or to to refuse to recognize this union as a union. However, what the Bolt and Uber management is saying is that they are trying to clarify an incorrect claim by the drivers that they are employee and not independent contractors. So why should we be concerned about this clarification from Bolt and Uber management? Why should we be concerned about whether Uber and Bolt drivers are considered as independent contractors or as employees? Now, this is the major issue that made the Bolt and Uber drivers to form this union. And from what we are seeing, it's going to be a test for the Nigerian government to show whether they can actually protect their citizens from unwholesome or unhealthy workplace practices. However, it is important for us to also mention that these issues are issues that are meant to be settled in the court of law, because why trade union wants drivers to be recognized as employees of these e-hailing companies and not to be known as independent contractors, the ride-hailing companies want the drivers to be recognized as independent contractors and not employee. Now, this is because what you recognize the drivers to be will eventually determine what benefits will accrue to them. And depending on what benefits that accrues to them, it will eventually mean whether the ride-hailing companies will be more profitable, because whatever they are to expend in paying these benefits will come from the money that they make in the business. And depending on these benefits, it will eventually be passed on. The cost of maintaining these workers, the cost of maintaining or paying these benefits will eventually be passed on to the customers and the consumers in the form of prices that you and I will pay. So, in response to these challenges, different countries have taken various measures, because it is not only in Nigeria that we are having this issue of Bolt and Uber drivers. And so in different countries, Bolt riders and Uber riders have taken the same management to the court. So for instance, let's try to do a preview of what is happening in other countries in this matter of Bolt and Uber drivers. So for instance, in the United States, Uber drivers have been fighting for employee status. They have been fighting for employee status, which could entitle them to benefits such as health insurance and minimum wage. Okay, they have been fighting for employee status that will entitle them to health insurance and minimum wage. Now, Uber has consistently resisted this and argued that drivers are independent contractors. As a result, the issue has been taken to court in several states. And we can also tell you that in states like California, Pennsylvania, and other states in the United States, they have given judgment demanding Bolt and Uber drivers to be given health insurance. However, the determination of whether they should be regarded as full employees of Bolt and Uber is also still not being concluded. So that is what is happening in the United States. In the United Kingdom, Uber lost a legal battle in 2016, over whether the drivers should be classified as employees or self-employed. Now, the ruling meant that drivers were entitled to minimum wage and holiday pay. However, Uber has since appealed this decision and the case is ongoing. Okay, so we have a case study from the UK, from the United Kingdom, where it has a judgment has been pronounced. A court of first instance has pronounced a judgment that Bolt and Uber drivers should be considered as an employees, and they should be paid minimum wage and holiday allowances. Now in France, although the case is under appeal, as we have also said earlier, now we don't know what the outcome of that appeal will be, but let's now go to France. In France, Uber has faced several challenges, including protests from taxi drivers and legal challenges over whether a service is legal. As a result, Uber has had to make changes to its business model, such as introducing new safety measures and partnering with licensed taxi companies. Now, how can we relate this with what is happening in UK and what is happening in France and what is happening in US as to what is happening in Nigeria? Before we go into that, let's look at what happened in Australia. In Australia, Uber drivers have also been fighting for better pay and working conditions. Now, in response, Uber has introduced new features such as in-app tipping policy, as well as offering drivers some flexibility and support. Now, overall, while the challenges faced by Uber drivers have been significant, there have been some positive developments in terms of improving their working conditions and securing better pay and benefits for the drivers. However, the situation is still evolving and there is no clear resolution in sight. In general, the classification of workers as employee or independent contractors is based on a set of criteria that are used to determine the level of control that an employer has over the worker. So for instance, and this is where the issue gets very interesting, where we have to now look into the labor laws of Nigeria. So for instance, if the worker is deemed to be under the control of the employer, they are typically classified as an employee. If the worker has more autonomy and control over their work, they are classified as an independent contractor. So in this case, can we say Uber driver or Bolt driver, is an employee because they are more in control? I mean, they are independent contractor because they are more in control of when they resume work or when they close from work. Now, in the case of Uber drivers, there are arguments on both sides. On the one hand, Uber drivers are not required to work specific hours. They can choose when and where to work, and they are not subject to direct supervision. Now, these factors suggest that Uber drivers could be classified as independent contractors. On the other hand, Uber sets the fares, that is how much you pay for a ride, and they determine the terms and conditions of the service, including the customer rating system, the type of car that can be used, and the criteria for accepting or rejecting a ride. Now, in addition to that, Uber drivers are required to meet certain standards and are subject to a rating system that can result in them being deactivated from the platform. Now, these factors suggest also that Uber drivers could be classified as employees. Now, unfortunately, the determination of whether Uber drivers are employees or independent contractors is a matter for the courts to decide based on the specific legal and regulatory framework that is operational. Now, under the Nigerian labor law, the distinction between employees and independent contractors is based on the nature of the relationship between the parties. For example, when an employee is someone who is engaged by an employer under a contract of service, while an independent contractor is someone who is engaged under a contract for services. Now, factors that may be considered when determining whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor in Nigeria include the level of control exercised by the employer over the worker. Another area is the degree of skill required to perform the work, and the degree of financial risk borne by the worker. So these are the factors that under Nigerian labor law that provides for whether a worker should be termed as an employee. And if you look at these factors, you will see that it tilts more because of the control that Uber have over particularly the fee and whether the worker is able to continue to work and not be deactivated from the platform. These are, and on the other hand, you also see some level of independence by the Uber driver. But in detail, you will see that if you analyze these factors critically and the way that the Uber and Bolt platform works, you will see that it takes more to making an Uber worker or Bolt worker an employee. However, these are matters for the court. Now, based on these factors, it is possible that Uber drivers in Nigeria could be classified as employees rather than independent contractors. This is because Uber exerts a significant level of control over the drivers, including setting prices, determining the terms and conditions of service, and monitoring driver behavior. Additionally, Uber drivers are not required to provide their own vehicles, as Uber provides the criteria for what type of vehicle that will be used, which further supports the argument that they should be considered as employees of Uber. However, one key distinguishing factor is that Uber or Bolt drivers have the discretion to choose to work under the condition set by the management or not. Okay. However, the classification of Uber drivers in Nigeria remain a matter for the court to decide, and the specific facts of each case will need to be carefully considered before a determination could be reached. Now, this is why for us the matter is a very tricky one, but we know that Uber and Bolt drivers also make a living out of this process, and Uber and Bolt management also make a living out of this whole process. And so we will encourage that both parties should look more into how they can come together and seek for an arbitration on this matter in an amicable way, such that both parties will have some sense of rationality, and have some sense of conclusion on this matter, so that they could work together in an environment that is conducive for them to make a living. On that note, we want to hear from you. Share your views, your comment in the comment section, and we'll get back to you. Until then, see you again.